from Leha, who was a darling of society.
The last composition of this frenetic and innovatory period prior to the First World War were the 4 orchestral songs for voice and large orchestra. In these, for the first time, Schoenberg made important innovations in the sphere of the orchestra. The vocal writing, in fact, is possibly not quite as remark-worthy as that in Erwartung or in the Metterlink song, which we've already heard. But the writing for the orchestra is something strange, and there's something new about it. Not only in the writing down, because Schoenberg invented at this time a new form of notating complex orchestral music, a new kind of simplified score, which I don't in fact think is so simplified, but causes more difficulty to musicians than the more conventional kind, but also in the way he decided to use the orchestra. You find one thing recurring in his writings and in his remarks, a dislike of complication and ornamentation for its own sake. If his music is very complex, it's supposed to be functionally complex. Everything's integrated into one thing. And one thing he grew suspicious of at this time was the multicolored orchestra. He wanted to reduce the orchestra, or perhaps he might have said raise it, to a more uniform sound body, which would allow people to hear the music going on without the distraction of color for its own sake, so that when color is used, it becomes something of much greater importance than what he would have called the blessing of the dressing. The first song of this set is a setting of Ernest Dowson's poem Seraphita. And here we do observe a remarkable recasting of the traditional role of the orchestra. Mainly, we're struck by the sonority of the 6 clarinets, joined to 24 violins and a large number of cellos with a little brass. And this is a reduction of orchestral colors and a limitation of the wide palette of the orchestra.
1914 and the outbreak of the First World War. The old world of Habsburg Vienna was nearing its end. The Emperor, Franz Josef, the emblem of that society, died in 1916. In the meantime, Schoenberg had returned from Berlin and joined the Austrian army.
If Schoenberg had fallen a victim of the First World War, as so many other artists on both sides had done, what would have been his position in the history of music? It's a question I think we can legitimately ask ourselves. He'd established in the first part of his creative life a full command of the late Romantic language with important and interesting innovations. And I think there would be no doubt that the works like Verklärte Nacht and the Chamber Symphony and the first and second string quartets would have gained great popularity. And I also think that the 5 orchestral pieces and Erwartung and Pierrot Lunaire and the works of this period leading up to Opus 22 orchestral songs would indeed have formed a characteristic repertoire of a so-called avant-garde artist. You would have seen music developing from the late Romantic period into the full flower of Expressionism. I'd have no doubt that these works would by themselves have formed a certain place in the conventional concert repertoire and would have been seen as roughly parallel to the achievement of Debussy or a composer of this type. But Schoenberg didn't die at this time. He went on to have a second creative section to his life, which in some ways is diametrically opposed to the first section. In a way, the invention of the 12-tone technique, which is the most publicized fact about Schoenberg, and the enormous complexities of the second half of his life, his emigration to the United States, the difficulties he found there, have in fact colored our appreciation of the first part of his life. And it is no accident that other composers and critics, younger ones, of the avant-garde as well as of more traditional people, do very much seem to prefer the first half of Schoenberg's life. But I think what I would like to say about this, and what I hope this film to some extent is going to show you in its entirety, is that whereas Schoenberg would have been a great composer among great composers by the work he created up till the First World War, when this is compounded with a strange and complicated development which took place during and after the First World War until his death in 1951, we have something rather different, something rather special. We have a unique figure, and one who more than any other artist that I can think of in all ways bears evidence to the agonies and successes of modern music in this century.
I always see the direction in which I should go so clearly that I have by now grown accustomed to the certainty that it will not turn out as I had imagined. One thing soon makes itself clear, that I find my present position strange and hard to understand, just as I found my previous position equally strange and equally hard to understand when and while I was living through it. So long as I continue to feel this, it is the work I have done in the past that I have put behind me that I will more easily understand. But in time, I will grow more familiar and reconciled with my latest work, and will wonder how I could have written in any other way. There is no doubt that when you are able to make a detached and objective appraisal of what you have done, the distinctions between past and present, old and new, strange and familiar, become blurred. For a few moments, one has seen both the stretch that is already behind one and the stretch that is still ahead of one, both simultaneously, and one has been satisfied. I can say no more about my creative work.